Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. This week, I am talking about some of the advanced reading copies I've received and have finally finished. These are all electronic from NetGalley, so thank you very much to them for sending me a copy of these. This time around, it is 2 adult science fiction and 1 young adult fantasy. So I'll sandwich them and talk about them in the order in which I read them. Science fiction, fantasy, science fiction. The first is Furious Heaven by Kate Elliott. It is the second book after Unconquerable Sun in her space opera that she pitches as a gender-bent Alexander the Great. So it's inspired by the life and politics of Alexander the Great's conquest across the world. In the first novel, we spent a lot of time getting to know Sun and several of her companions. Sun is the daughter of the current general leader of their empire, Kaonia. She is also currently the heir, but in their culture, she needs to prove herself in battle, so she has been highly trained to lead and has been a part of their military machine her entire life. There are very powerful supporting houses, other families in the empire, and each of those families sends a representative to be one of Sun's companions. And these are supposed to be the group of close-knit friends and allies, each with a special skill set that will help Sun lead an empire one day. Some wars have been set in motion and Sun will be carrying them out. I found that the pacing of this one was pretty good after about the 25% mark. Something happens at about 25% of the way and then, well, hello? She'll just stay there. Something happens about 25% of the way in and then bam, like events really start falling in line like dominoes. So you really just have to get to that point and then just go for the ride. As sometimes happens with epic stories that follow multiple POVs, there are a couple POVs that I enjoy following more than others. However, they definitely come together to help tell the overarching story. So if you enjoyed Unconquerable Sun, then you should pick up Furious Heaven. The next book is the fantasy. It is called Divine Rituals by Rebecca Ross. Over the past year, I have discovered that I really enjoy Rebecca Ross's writing. I happened to stumble upon this upcoming book of hers when I was checking out her website and went and requested it from NetGalley, and I was really happy to be approved. Divine Rivals is primarily the story of this young woman whose brother goes off to war. She doesn't want him to, but in this world, the gods have been sleeping. They're starting to wake up. Essentially, these nations are being roused to fight for their gods. Her brother has felt called to go enlist and join the army. So we have this magical background element to the story, but otherwise it feels fairly contemporary, as though it's set in like the 1930s, 1940s. The main character is trying to cope with her brother being gone. She's trying to cope with her mother's alcohol problem, and she wants to be a journalist so that she can tell stories that are meaningful to people. She goes to work for a paper and is dead set on becoming their new columnist so she can write these stories. At this same paper is another very, very good writer who also wants to be the head columnist, so they sort of clash at work. Things aren't going very well for her. She's dealing with her brother, her mother, having not a great time at work, struggling with trying to prove herself. The war front is getting worse and she feels as though people don't care. So she sort of she types her thoughts out from her typewriter, the letters, she sticks it under the wardrobe and it disappears. She continues to do this, and one day someone writes back. And unbeknownst to her, the person that she begins exchanging letters with is actually her competitor at the paper. So you have a little bit of a you've got mail scenario brewing, which I really enjoyed. But then also the war is imminent and she winds up becoming a war correspondent and going to the front lines to do some reporting about what's really going on. And that's where I think that the story really does take a deeper turn. I read this story in one sitting, and as I was reading, I just felt that kind of lump in my throat. Like, the writing was very evocative, and it just felt so emotional. I could really, really connect with both of the main characters. The majority of the story is from her perspective, but you also get his as well. Yeah, as you're just following them through this experience of becoming war correspondents and then being with them with what happens afterwards. So I really enjoyed the story. It was quite deep. It was very emotional. And I'm glad that there's more coming because I can't wait to read it. But of course now it's going to be a really long wait. That was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. The last book that I want to talk to you about is an adult space opera. It's very hard to describe. The Stars Undying. This story is inspired by the loves and the lives of Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. And the way that the author took the inspirations of like what would be the Roman Empire and the dynasties of Egypt and put it into the world building was very cool. So the Cleopatra-esque character is the oracle for her people. Their god is the Undying. He was actually a man that conquered many planets, wound up crashing a city onto a planet, and the city is sunken, hiding all of its wealth and treasures beneath the waves. He had created a very specialized computer that captured his soul, so he lives, if you believe this, he lives undying in this pearl that the ruler of this planet keeps in their ear so that they can talk with the Undying and are basically their oracle. One of the main characters is the daughter of the former ruler, and she and her sister enter into a civil war for control after their father passes away. Their planet is a client planet of a much larger empire, and when the commander of that much larger empire comes to their planet seeking some of the wealth that's hidden beneath it, she enters into an agreement with the commander to help shore up her control as queen in exchange for trying to help the political things that he needs. The narrative style is very interesting. It's told from each of their perspectives as this alliance and this relationship is growing and spilling over from her whole planet and starting to affect the wider empire. One of them is a very unreliable narrator and sort of starts to tell you that very early on. So I thought that piece of this was very well done. However, if you're familiar at all with the story of Caesar and Cleopatra, you know that it doesn't necessarily end very, very well for all parties. And as I was reading, I just had this growing sense of unease, like, okay, but what's about to happen? I enjoyed the experience of reading it, even though it made me kind of uncomfortable just because of that foreshadowing of knowing how the story was inspired. This also is the first book in a series. It is not standalone, and there is definitely room for the story to continue. Some of the eARCs I have read recently. I have a couple left in my pocket that I would like to read before the end of the year. 2 fantasies and a romance. So I will really be trying to prioritize those so that NetGalley doesn't get too mad at me. I hope that I've intrigued you about at least one of these stories and you might be considering picking it up. And if you do, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please support your local library and have a very safe and wonderful Thanksgiving to my fellow Americans.